Thank you, Mr. Acting Deputy President. Look, I rise tonight to speak briefly of positive things. It's been actually quite a dark couple of weeks in this Parliament. Probably depends on your point of view, and it depends on which side of the chamber you're sitting. And it is hard to stay positive when you see the incredible unforced errors of judgment being made one after another by this government in a series of policy, tactical and strategic blunders that might— well, I'll get to the positive stuff, Senator Birmingham. It is difficult to stay positive, but look, let me begin. And the Acting Deputy President, who's in the chair tonight, will be pleased to know this, that apparently on the wires is reporting that the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations in Singapore appear to have crashed or stalled for the time being, which means this Parliament and a committee that I sit on, the Treaties Committee, won't at some stage in the near future be presented with this document that no Australian citizen outside massive lobbyists have seen and ordered to bring it into Australian domestic law. And I start there because the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, as a place for positivity, you wouldn't expect to find optimism there, because it's effectively a way of subordinating sovereign parliaments and domestic law beneath the rule of unaccountable corporations, most of the largest ones from a long way from here. And yet it has invoked a spirited people's movement right around the world, particularly in places where the impacts of such agreements would be much more severe than they would even in Australia, where we've got things like cheap medicines would be on the chopping block, software, entertainment products and various other things, including the ability of corporations to sue sovereign governments. This has invoked an extraordinary people's movement around the world, and maybe tonight we're seeing some signs of their progress. We're also seeing a parliament where the government is doing everything it can to smash up progress on climate change. But again, around the world we see a global movement of civil society, a global movement of people, 600,000 of whom signed a global petition to stand with the Philippines. So the colossal disaster that overtook the coastal Philippines with the hurricane of only a few weeks ago was occurring against the backdrop of stalled progress at climate negotiations in Warsaw, where we've seen national governments in the industrialised world fail to do very much, and in fact taking us backwards. And yet voices from civil society, voices of ordinary people coming together in a movement of around the world can actually change things, I think, and are probably going to provide the leadership that this Parliament is so dramatically failing to provide. The global power shift brought 500 people from 135 countries together to plan and get active in building a global climate movement. When leaders fail, leadership arises from elsewhere, and we're seeing that happening all over the place. It's not just a movement of radical activists, it's mothers and fathers, it's grandparents, it's church leaders, lawyers, teachers, nurses and students. It's a community standing up to an industry and a set of linked industries that are threatening our future. And it is tremendously inspiring to work as part of the Green movement and the global Green movement. Of course, we are the Australian representatives of a parliamentary movement that exists in many, many countries around the world and has representatives all over the world. It's extraordinary to be a part of that uprising and that upwelling. One of the most optimistic things I think that's happening at the moment in the climate movement, even as this government moves to dismantle what instruments we have to bring our carbon emissions back under control, is the movement under the sort of broad umbrella of 350.org, which refers to that sort of no-go zone of parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere for divestment. So if the fossil industries have captured national legislatures and stalled international progress toward an agreement, we'll attack them where it hurts, which is the bottom line. And that global divestment movement, noting that 200 companies, only 200 companies, hold the vast majority of coal, oil and gas reserves, the top 4 of them including BHP Billiton. The top 5 oil and gas companies include Exxon, BP and Chevron. This brings tremendous optimism to me. This is something we can do a bit about by divesting, whether it's pension funds, superannuation funds, whether it's investment interests that are managed by churches or by universities or by people of good heart anywhere at all, right down to the ordinary deposit holder who can go to their bank and divest and let them know exactly why they're doing it and put their savings with an entity that is not investing in the ruination of the climate and thereby the economy and society itself. What we've seen so far on this campaign to date, 22 cities in the United States, 7 colleges and universities, 19 religious institutions, this is in Australia now, including Uniting Church New South Wales and the ACT, 3 foundations, 6 other large institutions have divested from fossil fuels. It's a beginning. It's not necessarily shaking the fossil industry to its foundations yet, but it will. It will, as we gain traction and as people realise just how much power they have to undermine the financial underpinnings of the entities that are undermining the biological underpinnings of our whole society. And that movement is pretty strong in Perth. We've got a wonderful young woman, Jamie, who's helping to motivate and inspire and bring people together in Western Australia. Charlie, who visited us from Melbourne and lit up a meeting when they suddenly realised the tools that we have to hand to take our power back. Jamie Hansen, who we unfortunately and I hope temporarily lost to Melbourne, and ultimately Bill McKibben, the American environmentalist who I was very fortunate to meet when he spoke at the National Press Club earlier this year, who is motivating this global network, this global divestment network, that I think stands a better chance perhaps than this legislature does, certainly over the next few months, of making a substantial difference. And of course we need both kinds of action going at the same time, as the carbon price and entities like the Clean Energy Finance Corporation provide the instruments and the capital that we need to build the platform of the energy industries of this century that we're now in. At the same time, we need to go after and quite seriously attack as directly as we can the entities that seem hell-bent on profiting from the destruction of the environment. Communities around the country that are resisting fracking, and it might not seem that the Lock the Gate movement has all that much in common. A farmer in regional New South Wales or in the Midwest of WA, what do they have in common with a university student approaching their university senate to ask for them to divest? They have everything in common. They have an enormous amount in common. Those in Broome in the Midwest of Western Australia, where the campaign against gas fracking is only really just taking off. Lock the Gate has found a place in Geraldton, as you can imagine. And I can't go past a shout-out to those who occupied the camp at Walmadan Beach on the Kimberley coast, a few dozen kilometres north of Broome, and held off Woodside, another one of the fossil fuel industries that seems to be intent and hell-bent on wrecking the climate, and they beat them. People motivated in protection of country and culture, who can stand up against some of the most powerful institutions in this country and indeed in the world, and prevail. The people of the West Kimberley know a bit about resisting and fending off inappropriate development. Some of the same people involved in the late 1990s in preventing a very large dam or a network of dams being thrown across the mighty Fitzroy River, partly for an irrigated, genetically modified cotton plantation proposal. Absolute madness, completely the opposite of the kind of development that people are pursuing up there. And I believe that those people will prevail, not simply in holding off the things that they don't want, but in providing for and catalysing the things that they do. And for me, a lot of these things wind back ultimately to climate and to energy issues. It is the root of some of the most fast-moving but also the most profound changes that our society is undergoing, and if we can crack that one, I believe we can do anything at all. Last year, there were 109 operational concentrating solar power or solar thermal power stations generating over 3,000 megawatts. Now, against the backdrop of global energy markets, 3,000 meg is a drop in the ocean. But watch what happens. 52 more are now under development that will generate an additional 8,000 megawatts. And this is an industry that provides baseload or better than baseload solar power day and night, 24/7. Senator Milne and I visited a plant in Spain. There is now, last December, about this time last year, a plant that had been running for 365 days. Solar Reserve, a company that is building a plant 6 times the size, recently set up an office in Perth, in my hometown, Western Australia. They'll be working with the mining industry, with those who are looking for a hedge against rising gas prices out in the goldfields in the central Pilbara, and good luck to them. We'll be doing everything that we can to help. I just want to finish with a quote from Paul Hawken, from a speech to a graduating university class called "You are brilliant and the earth is hiring." And he said, "When I'm asked if I'm pessimistic or optimistic about the future, my answer is always the same. If you look at the science about what's happening on Earth and aren't pessimistic, you don't understand the data. But if you meet the people who are working to restore the Earth and the lives of the poor and you aren't optimistic, you haven't got a pulse." I thank the chamber.